Hello, I'm Dr. Sander. Welcome back to Music Theory Simplified. In our last video, we looked at the 10 rules for good voice leading and how they would be applied to something we call the chorale. And the chorale, as we saw, is simply a 4-voice chord progression. In this video, we're going to apply those 10 rules to good part writing using root position chords. Now, that word part writing simply means multi-voiced harmonies and connecting them together using good voice leading. So in this video, I'm going to give you 3 specific formulas that will allow you to part write using root position chords. Now, there are more than 3 formulas, obviously. If all there was to it was applying 3 formulas to root position chords, we could get a computer to do that. But we'll start with 3, and as we progress through these videos, I'm going to give you other formulas and other specific directives on how to connect certain chords together. But we do have to start someplace, so we're going to start with root position chords. That means the root of the chord is in the lowest voice, or in this case, the bass. Here we have a progression that uses only root position triads. Now, in reality, such a harmonic progression would be very rare because most music uses a combination of both inverted and root position chords. One of the keys to good part writing is to always be aware of what the root of the chord is. Now here it's easy because we're dealing with root position chords, so it's in the bass. But when we start to talk about inversions, then it gets a little bit more tricky. But since we have to start somewhere, and since when we looked at triads we looked at root position first, it makes sense that from a part writing standpoint, we would begin by looking at only root position triads. Let's listen to this progression. Now you might be asking yourself, we have 4 voices and only 3 notes of the triad. So what note gets doubled? For the time being, let's just work on the rule that we will always double the root of the chord. This won't always be the case, but for our purposes right now, let's follow this general rule. Let's just take a moment to point out these doublings in this progression. Another secret to good part writing is to always be aware of the intervallic relationships that connect the root of each chord. This is always found in the bass when we use root position triads. When writing in root position triads, we rely on 3 different formulas that cover all root motion. The first is when the root motion is by 4th or 5th. In these cases, we will use what we call the F formula. When the root motion is by 3rd, we will use the T formula. T stands for 3rd. And finally, when the root motion is by 2nd, we will use the S formula. S stands for 2nd. Let's begin by looking at what I call the F formula. And F stands for 4th or 5th. The most common occurrence of the F formula occurs between the tonic and dominant. We are either going down a 4th or up a 5th will get you the same pitch class. But we also find it between the 1 and the 4 chord, or between the 2 and the 5 chord. In each of these cases, we will apply the F formula. Here we have shown a tonic to dominant with the root motion that moves by 4th. The formula consists of 2 parts. First, keep the tone that is common between the 2 chords, and second, the remaining 2 voices move by step in similar motion, which simply means in the same direction. Let's look at another example of the F formula. Here we have 2 chords in the key of C, a 2 chord going to a 6 chord. The first step to find the note that's common between these 2, in this case it's here in the tenor, the A, and then the remaining voices move by step in similar motion. Let's try looking at one more progression, but this time let's build it note by note. Here we have a tonic to dominant in the key of F, so the notes we're looking for are C, E, and G. So the first step is to find that common tone between these 2 chords. It's the C. The remaining question is whether the two voices left move up or down by step. If we look at the soprano, we can find that the F can move up to a G, which is a chord tone, or it can move down to an E, which is also a chord tone. So that doesn't help us. But if we look at the other voice, if it moves up, it goes to the note B, which is not part of the chord. So because this alto voice can only move down to get to a chord tone, that means the upper voice has to move down as well. So both voices are moving together by step. Now it's your turn to try it on your own. In the key of E flat, here's a 2 chord going to a 5 chord. Remember to keep the common tone, and the remaining two voices move by step in similar motion. Press pause until you've come up with the answer. The notes of the 5 chord in E flat are B flat, D, and F, so our first step is to find the note that is common to both of these chords. It's the F. The other two voices move by step in the same direction to the B flat and the D. Now let's look at the formula that I call the T formula, and T stands for third. The second most common way to connect root position chords is by third, like the 1 to the 6, the 4 to the 2, and the 6 to the 4. For each of these cases, it's best to use what we call the T formula. The T formula simply says to keep the two common tones between the two chords, and the remaining voice moves by step. It's important to remember that this is the only formula where there are actually two common tones between the two chords. Here we have in C minor a 1 to a 3 chord. So we're going to keep the two common tones, the E flat and the G, and the remaining voice, the C in the soprano, moves down by step to the B flat. Now you try it. Here we have a 4 chord going to a 2 chord in D major. Figure out the notes of the 2 chord and how to connect them using the T formula. Push pause until you have the answer. The notes that we're looking for this chord are E, G, and B. So the two common tones are the B and the G. And the final note, the D in the alto, moves up by step to double the E. And finally, let's look at what I call the S formula. S stands for second. Movement by second is the least common of all root motions. We find it most often when the 4 goes to the 5 chord. When the root moves by step, we have to be very careful to avoid parallel motion. So it's important to remember that the S formula starts off by requiring that all voices move contrary to the bass, 2 by step and 1 by third. Remember to raise the leading tone in minor. Here's another progression. This time the bass is moving down by step from a 6 to a 5. So if the bass is moving down, we're going to move contrary, 2 by step, 1 by third. Just be sure you identify the voice that's moving by third first. Then it's easy to figure out what the remaining two voices do. Now you try it. Use the S formula to write this progression, a 4 going to 5 in G minor. Remember, move it contrary to the bass, 2 by step, 1 by third. Find the one that moves by third first. Push pause until you have the answer. Then push play. Ready for the answer? The notes we're looking for are D, F sharp, and A. Did you remember to raise the leading tone because we're in G minor? So moving contrary, we have the C going down a third to the A, the G going down to the F sharp, and the E going down to the D. Well, there you have them. 3 rules for connecting root position triads. Now, as I said in the beginning, there are more ways to do this. When we start to talk about inversions or we have certain chord connections, we're going to have to make some adjustments. But for right now, let's work on just these 3 rules. So now that you've learned them, let's put them into application in an actual progression. In beginning this process, we always have to be aware of how the roots are moving. Since these are all root position triads, we can look to the bass to figure this out. The 1 to the 6 is root motion by third, so we will use the T formula. The T formula says to keep 2 common tones in the remaining voice moves by step. So we're looking for an E, a G, and a B. The 2 common tones are the G and the B. And then the remaining voice moves up from the D to the E by step. The next progression shows a 6 chord going to a 3, which is root motion by fourth. For this, we will use the F formula, and that says to keep the common tone, which is the B, and the 2 remaining voices move by step in the same direction. The next chord connection in our progression is a 3 chord going to a 2. This is root motion by second, in which case we'll use the S formula. Now remember, this is the one where we all have to move contrary to the bass. 2 by step, 1 by third. Now it's important to find the one that moves by third first. Then it's easier to see where the remaining 2 voices move. The next example is a 2 chord going to the 4 chord. This is root motion by third, and again, we're going to use the T formula that says to keep 2 common tones, and the remaining voice moves by step. Moving on, we have a 4 chord going to the 5 chord, subdominant to dominant, and that's root motion by second. Remember to use the S formula, contrary motion to the bass, 2 by step, 1 by third. And again, it's easiest to find the one that moves by third first. Here we have the C going to the A. Once you figure that one out, the remaining 2 simply move by step. Try figuring out this last one on your own. Push pause until you have the answer. So a dominant to tonic 5 to 1 is root motion by fourth or fifth, so we use the F formula. Keep the common tone, and the remaining 2 voices move by step. Now that we're done with our progression, let's put some text to it and listen to what it sounds like. But we're not done yet. As good as this sounds, I'm going to show you something I think will open your eyes to a whole world of aesthetic possibilities. If we follow good voice leading, here's some things that we can do. If you look at the soprano line, you'll see that it lies in a rather high register. So one of the things we can do is to actually move it down an octave and give it to the altos, and then give the sopranos the alto line. This has a different effect. Here's what it sounds like. Well, that certainly works, but it does lose a bit of its brilliance by being in such a low register. So what if we gave the alto voice to the tenor and brought them up into a higher register and then moved the tenor voice to the soprano? Here's what that would sound like. So you see, by following good voice leading up front, it gives you the flexibility to change the voicing around and not to create voice leading problems. And as you can see, we have 3 different progressions, each with a slightly different sound, following the same harmony and following the same rules. So we packed a lot into today's lesson, but I think it's really critical that you start to think systematically about how you connect chords, and these formulas are a way to do that. It's not arbitrary, and the worst thing you can do is to start part writing by just putting notes here and there without thinking about the consequences in terms of voice leading. So hopefully this helped you see how we can connect chords in a fairly systematic way. For now, this is what you need to focus on, and as we progress further, we'll look at other kinds of formulas. So this is Dr. Sander reminding you, as always, to keep it simple.